Uh, okay, thank you. And why don't we get it started? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our Seoul, Washington Forum Virtual Meeting 2020, co-hosted by the Sejong Institute and Heritage Foundation. My name is Woo Jung-yeop, and I'm the director of the Center for American Studies at the Sejong Institute. I'd like to start by wishing you and your families my personal best for your health and safety in this time. I'd like to also express my profound gratitude to those who have joined us all morning in Seoul and in the late evening in DC. I directed back to my role today, which is to introduce two people representing the organizations for their remarks. First, please welcome Dr. Chaesung, the president of the Sejong Institute, for his opening remarks. Dr. Park, please.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sejoong-Heritage virtual meeting on the topic prospects and challenges of Korea-US, US-Korea alliance. Thank you very much, Heritage Foundation, for co-hosting this event with us. Thank you, Vice President Jim Carafano, and thank you, Bruce. I think we are very fortunate today to have two key policymakers and two renowned experts who are working for US-Korea, Korea-US alliance affairs in their respective countries. On the American side first, we have Marc Knapper of the State Department and Revere of Brookings Institution. Thank you for joining us today. On the Korean side, we have Ko Yun-ju of Foreign Ministry and Chaesung of Seoul National University. Thank you for your participation. I'd like to extend my also warm welcome to all other participants of this Zoom webinar. By the way, we have a week or maybe less than a week left until US presidential election. Just like Americans, I am also checking with the public polls in the battleground states every day. Regardless who will be elected president of the United States, the next US administration is supposed to review, fix, and strengthen its alliance with South Korea. And I think the South Korean government will do the same with the US. Today, I'm looking forward to heated but fruitful discussion for problem solving, sustainable and forward-looking alliance cooperation between our two countries far into the future. Thank you, Heritage Foundation again. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Bruce. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Beck. Next, please welcome Dr. James Carafano of the Heritage Foundation.
Sal, I want to thank everyone for joining us in this joint conference today. It's a deep honor and privilege for us to co-host this event. The Heritage Foundation hosts many events during the year, but we're especially pleased to be able to work with the preeminent think tank in the Republic of Korea to address such important topics and issues to both our countries. And a special thank you to Dr. Park Hak-soon, the president of Sejong, for this opportunity. And we're only sorry that we can't be with our Korean colleagues in person, because otherwise you just can't get a good meal of bulgogi and kimchi. But look, we have to make do. But it's still great to be together in a virtual event with many people who participate who otherwise would not be able to do so. And it is very, very, very important that we meet and talk now. To be sure, the alliance faces many challenges, both internal and external, differences of views on course sharing arrangements and the transition of operational wartime control. And those discussions are taking place in the midst of the growing North Korea threat, as well as international concerns of Chinese actions on a range of issues. So to discuss these topics, we have an incredibly distinguished panel of government officials and outside experts. I think, quite honestly, a discussion that you really couldn't match anywhere in the world to talk about these important affairs. A wide range of issues and a limited time, so I will conclude my remarks. But again, a very warm welcome and thank you to this Sejong Institute. And I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Bruce Klingner, who is the Heritage Foundation Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia and our expert on all things on the peninsula, and our resident adventurer. But so Bruce, over to you. And again, thank you all so much for joining us today.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jim and Dr. Peck and others for being here. We have a full list of topics we want to get to in a limited amount of time. So I'm not going to go through biographies of each of the panelists. We'd be here all night, but just briefly to mention that we have Mr. Ko Yun-ju, the Director General, North American Affairs Bureau at the South Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Marc Knapper, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Korea and Japan at the U.S. Department of State, Evans Revere, the former Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and Acting Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, and Dr. Chun Chaesung, the Professor of Seoul National University. Just to note to the audience, both Director General Ko and Deputy Assistant Secretary Knapper need to depart by about 8:30 p.m. Washington time or 9:30 a.m. Korea time. So each of the panelists will do their presentation, then we'll move to a question and answer period, which I will moderate. And some of the questions will be coming from me and others will be coming from the audience. So to the audience members, please use the Q&A function down at the bottom of the screen to type in questions. And you can start typing them in anytime and I will draw from them after the presentations are done. And please indicate if the question is directed at any specific panel member or members. So we'll get right started. So Mr. Ko, if you could do your presentation, please.
Yes, thank you. First of all, let me thank the Seoul Institute and the Heritage Foundation for giving me this opportunity to share my thought with the distinguished experts. Also, they are all good friends of mine, so I feel at home. As Director General in charge of the Korea-United States relations at the Korean Foreign Ministry, I'm confidently say that our alliance with the United States is very strong and continues to develop to become even stronger. With the limited time, let me briefly talk about the 3 reasons out of the many to support my statement. Number 1, people-to-people's mutual understanding is deep and perception to each other is very positive in both countries. Recent survey conducted by Chicago Council on Global Affairs shows that Americans see Korea favorable, giving a score of 60 out of 100, which is the highest ever since the survey was first conducted in 1978. Another survey conducted last September by Pew Research Center shows that 59% of Korean respondents see the United States favorable. United States is the top out of 13 surveyed friendly countries. I think this represents that the mutual understanding and trust of the two people grew deeper, and which I think is the strong backbone for alliance. Number 2, communications between the two governments are unprecedentedly strong. Over just 3.5 years, President Moon and President Trump had 9 times summit meetings and also 25 times telephone conversations. Between foreign ministers, they have 15 times meetings and 35 times telephone conversations. Even under the COVID-19 situation, face-to-face meetings between high-level officials such as national security advisors, defense ministers, and the vice foreign ministers took place recently. Sometimes frequent and candid communications look to the public eye that there are different views and disputes between allies. As we all know, between family members, there are issues and disputes. The most important thing I think is how to manage the difference. I introduced my favorite phrases that I found in the Kurt Campbell's book. Kurt Campbell quoted in his book titled The Pivot, what former Secretary George Shultz talked about alliance. Secretary Shultz described alliance management as gardening. It requires patience, the careful tending of sensitive issues, the routine weeding out of thorny ones, and the far-sighted planting of new sources of cooperation. I believe our alliance with the United States has developed and continued to evolve against new challenges through such an alliance management as what Secretary Shultz described. Candid communication is the key to maintain healthy and dynamic alliance. Number 3, our partnership is deepening and expanding. KORO's FTA was revised, and now in operation to the benefits of the two countries. Mutual trade volume reached the highest last year, amounting to $135 billion. Korean companies like Samsung, Lotte, SK augmented investment and created good jobs in the United States. Such balanced and mutual beneficial economic trend continues. For regional cooperation, two governments are working closely to identify and implement cooperation projects between New Southern Policy and Indo-Pacific Strategy. We are also coping with the COVID-19 crisis with concerted efforts. We helped each other in test kits, PPE, repatriation of stranded nationals, and kept border open for each other. And also with the alliance cooperation. Korean missile guidelines was again revised this year to give a boost to Korean civilian space industry by lifting restrictions on the use of the solid fuel propellant for the space launch vehicles. I think our partnership expands beyond the frontiers. I briefly talked about how our alliance looks like. Yet, I know there are challenges for alliance as well. For the challenges, I look forward to our following discussions. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Knapper, if you could do your presentation.
I was a little worried that when Director General Ko stopped right there with the challenges, he was going to make me talk about them instead of all the good news that he was offering. But let me echo his thanks to our hosts today, Heritage Foundation, the Sejong Institute. Really appreciate all the great work that our colleagues in these two great institutions do individually and together, and especially in bringing together us this evening, or in the case of Seoul, in your morning. I think I've done a few of these already over the past several months with Director General Ko, and I think next time I'm going to have to ask to go first, because he's always stealing my points and my lines, and really, I mean, I think just to show how well aligned we are as allies. I mean, really, there's nothing in what he said that I would find issue with. I mean, this is an alliance that over 70 years. We're celebrating this year 7 decades, in which our two countries have forged a relationship on the battlefield with shared sacrifice in the defense of freedom. It's an alliance at whose foundation is our military and security relationship, but that over the past 7 decades has evolved, as Director General Ko said, into a relationship that covers virtually every band of human endeavor along the spectrum that one could think of, whether it's our very deep and close trade and investment relationship. Thanks to Korean investment in the United States, we have tens of thousands of good jobs for American workers and their families, and these are jobs created by, say, Samsung Electronics in Texas, or Lotte Chemical in Louisiana, SK Innovation in Georgia. Hanwha just won a contract for a large solar array, $150 million. So, I mean, this is where, as we say, the rubber hits the road when it comes to our relationship with Korea. It's not just folks within the Washington D.C. Beltway talking about it in the abstract, but when you do have real investment and real jobs created, it really does mean something. And it's thanks to, again, the relationship that's evolved. And I agree completely with Director General Ko that it's the people-to-people ties between our two countries that has helped to build the bridges that have allowed us to cooperate on so many different levels and in so many different areas, whether it's the economy, whether it's our security partnership, whether it's science and technology cooperation, whether it's health cooperation. I look back this past 6-7 months at the cooperation that the United States and Korea have done together against the backdrop of the pandemic, and it is everything from working together on vaccines or therapeutics. It's working together to repatriate our citizens who were stranded overseas. When airline routes shut down, it's working together to provide test kits and other equipment, as the Republic of Korea so generously did early on. And the reason we're able to do this, it's the people-to-people ties, but it's the it's the muscle memory that we have developed over the years. It's like a golf swing. The more you practice it, the better you get. And we've been practicing as allies for a very long time. And in health cooperation, it started, or it really has evolved, whether it's Korean researchers coming to the National Institutes of Health, it's American researchers going to Korean institutions and working and building friendships and relationships. In 2014, when the Ebola crisis broke out in West Africa, US and South Korean medical doctors went there to Sierra Leone to fight the disease. When MERS broke out in Korea in 2015, it was American CDC experts who came to Korea to help out. It's our two countries working together on the global health security agenda, and on and on. And thanks to these patterns of cooperation, we were able to quickly move into action to fight COVID together. And so, as we look forward, I know the theme of this event is looking forward to 2021 and meeting the challenges of next year. But I am fully confident that given that our alliance has evolved so well over the decades, that whatever challenges await us in the year ahead, we'll be ready to meet it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Evans Revere, please.
I always almost forget to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Bruce. It's a real honor to be a participant in this event, and a particular delight to be with old friends and colleagues of long standing. Like my good friend, Ambassador Ko, I feel like I'm very much at home. Let me also convey very special thanks to Dr. Peck and his colleagues at Sejong for making this possible, and of course, to Jim Carafano and Bruce Klingner of Heritage for your kind invitation for me to be here this evening. The theme of today's meeting is, of course, prospects and challenges for our alliance in 2021. I have to say, in all frankness, and since I'm a former government official, I can be very frank, I see numerous challenges ahead for an alliance that many of us, including everybody participating in this panel, have worked very hard to nurture and strengthen over the decades. But I also believe that the alliance's prospects are regrettably far from clear, at least to me at this point. The challenges that we face are going to require people of goodwill in both of our countries to redouble their commitment to our shared values to keep the alliance on the right path. Without question, this alliance remains absolutely crucial to preserving peace and stability in Northeast Asia. Let me just say a few words about some of the challenges, at least from my perspective, that we face. The US-South Korea alliance is witnessing several rather troubling developments, not the least of which is the rise of a highly nationalistic and aggressive China. Beijing is using a range of political, diplomatic, military, and economic tools to expand its influence, to reduce that of the United States, and occasionally to intimidate its neighbors. China also seems determined to rewrite history, as we saw recently when the Chinese leader ignored the fact that it was the PRC that was the last country to invade the Korean Peninsula, and through that invasion prevented the reunification of the Korean nation. Instead, Xi Jinping trumpeted China's so-called victory over the United States in the Korean War and described China's role in that conflict being in the cause of peace and justice. Besides insulting the intelligence and the sacrifices of the South Korean people, much of Xi's message was actually aimed at the United States. It reflected, of course, the increasingly confrontational tone of US-China relations. The downturn in Washington-Beijing ties has placed Seoul in a very difficult position, especially since the United States is pressing the ROK to join America and its other regional allies and partners in pushing back against China. For well-known reasons, Seoul is reluctant to jump on an anti-China bandwagon. The "you are with us" or "against us" rhetoric coming out of some quarters in Washington has caused predictable discomfort in Seoul. Resolving this conundrum is not going to be easy, but doing so, in my view, has to start with a willingness on Washington's part to show greater understanding of South Korea's dilemma. At the same time, I think Seoul has to realize that if the shared values that serve as the bedrock of the US-ROK alliance are to have any real meaning, South Korea, the Republic of Korea, has to find a way to show solidarity with the United States and the principles that it is trying to advance as it promotes a free and open Indo-Pacific. Another core challenge facing the alliance is uncertainty over America's commitment to the region and to the US-ROK alliance. If truth be told, an American president like none we have ever seen has bitterly criticized America's allies, particularly South Korea, and even raised questions about the value of the US-ROK alliance over the years. This fact is behind the US demands for a massive increase in ROK burden-sharing contributions, as well as the occasional hints that we hear from the United States that a reduction in American forces stationed in Korea could be in the offing down the road. With good reason, many people in Korea have expressed opposition to Washington's SMA demands, and some see US hints of force reductions as a barely disguised attempt at extortion or quid pro quo. Some Koreans have pushed back against Washington's demands by suggesting that Korea itself may have to reassess the value of the alliance. In my view, that kind of language risks taking us into very troubling territory, especially since it could reinforce the alliance skepticism that has taken hold in some quarters in Washington. Next week's presidential election, United States presidential election, will be in part a referendum on Washington's approach to alliances. In that sense, a defeat for the current administration would speak volumes about what the American people think about the idea of treating our allies in an adversarial fashion. Meanwhile, going forward, the US position on SMA should be reassessed to ensure that it fully accounts for the major burden that the South Korean military already bears in defending the front lines of freedom. And in addition, Washington, I think, should acknowledge that the alliance is as much in America's interest as it is in that of the ROK. The alliance and Korea's solid support enable the United States to forward deploy a broad range of assets and capabilities in the midst of one of the world's most dynamic and dangerous regions. Meanwhile, for its part, South Korea, I think, should do more to acquire the capabilities necessary to allow OPCON transfer, wartime OPCON transfer, to take place. To be very frank, Seoul's position has raised concerns in many quarters of the United States that the ROK is trying to make a political statement via OPCON transfer instead of preparing itself militarily to assume OPCON. I'm almost out of time, so let me just close by making three very quick points on North Korea. First, Seoul and Washington, despite their very best efforts, are often not on the same page when it comes to dealing with Pyongyang. We've seen some gaps on sanctions, on an end-of-war declaration, and even in Seoul's prioritization of North-South dialogue over denuclearization. Second, North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile threats are growing, and in time will require the allies to fundamentally reassess their approach or be prepared to accept a fait accompli. The allies must recognize that absent a new approach that compels Pyongyang to denuclearize, the DPRK is on its way to becoming a permanently nuclear-armed state. And third and finally, the cessation of major field exercises by US and ROK forces has undermined readiness, in my view, and sent the wrong message to Pyongyang, which showed us recently how it is steadily enhancing its conventional warfare capabilities. As alliance partners, we ignore that at our peril. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Evans. Professor Chun?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for this great opportunity. It's always pleasant and helpful to talk with our American friends and colleagues. Let me start with some observations of the short-term alliance issues. I'm a purely an academic, so I'm an out-of-government observer, so my opinion is not related to my government's position at all. So let me address questions, frankly, from a kind of academic perspective. There are short-term alliance maintenance issues such as burden sharing, transfer of wartime OPCON, possible reduction or relocating the USFK, North Korea policy involving the declaration of the end of the Korean War, the rearrangement of the joint military exercise, the controversy regarding the formation of the collective security system of Asia, leading to the issue of the so-called Quad Plus. These are short-term issues, but as you know, there are long-term structural issues which are very important to design the future of the alliance. Let me start with the US leadership issue. Although these issues, they are related to structural changes. As the unipolar system continues, the burden for the United States as the sole leading country has been growing, and it is in some sense inevitable to adjust the current system. Actually, this has happened in the past history in which the United States tried to put pressure on alliance in a good sense and make them contribute more to the maintenance of the international order. As the burden sharing issue surfaced under the Trump administration, it is not confined to South Korea, and it is not confined to the issue of contribution of just money. It is the issue of comprehensive burden sharing for the strengthening of the alliance and reassurance between the United States and its allies all over the world. The second, we have to talk about China issue. The recent 52nd SCM raised various concerns in South Korea, especially the future of the USFK. Many reports from the United States these days emphasize the need to relocating the US forces in foreign countries in Asia to cope with uncertain threat, regionally, mainly from China. So there is a need for the United States to rearrange US forces. The optimal deployment structure to deal with regional security threats need to be rearranged. We have a rather rapid development in implementing the so-called multi-domain operations in Asia. With the rise of China, the United States is critically interested in maintaining the current rule-based order and in balancing China's behavior, undermining liberal international order. Also, South Korea has developed under the US-led liberal international order and has contributed to strengthening this order, showing formidable followership. There is a strong strategic common ground to sustain and strengthen the existing international order and promote rule-based, multilateral nature of the current order. However, interest structure of both countries in short term is not always completely identical. As a leading power, the United States tried to check and balance China's policy in comprehensive issue areas from unfair trade practice to maritime disputes. South Korea, as an ally of the United States, is more focused on the issues related to the Korean Peninsula and the bilateral relations with China. Peaceful relations with denuclearized North Korea is still an important policy objective. South Korea expects China's constructive role in putting pressure on North Korea and help the North transform itself as a normal country conforming to international rules. More confrontational China policy can benefit or at least be useful to the United States by solving the serious problem of trade imbalance and preventing unfair economic and technology policy in China, and also by checking China's attempt to increase its military presence in Asia region. South Korea, however, concluded the strategic cooperative partnership with China, as you know, under the Lee Myung-bak period, now Washington's strategic competitor, China. To heavy economic dependence on China and also rising competition in many economic areas with China drives South Korea to the direction of external diversification policy. However, there's still an expectation that China should continue to be a strong supporter for economic sanctions against North Korea in the rising US-China strategic rivalry. But that expectation is also in South Korea losing grounds because there is a conflict of interest among these countries. However, as long as the US military dominance prevails in Asia, South Korea tries to achieve the policy objectives of denuclearizing North Korea, establishing peace system on the peninsula, and to transform the North into a normal country, which requires China's strong commitment and assistance. So seemingly, as many people said, there might be some disagreement about the North Korea policy or the objective of long-term alliance, but I think in the long-term sense, there is a clear agreement between two countries about how to deal with the rise of China and the North Korean nuclear problem. Shortly, the last thing is that there was a survey data conducted in September in Korea, in which South Koreans say that, well, there is a national preference for the United States is 60%, and there is a national preference for China is only 7%. And more than 50% of South Koreans said that we need USFK even after unification. So there is a strong foothold for among South Koreans for the future of the US and South Korea alliance. And South Korea is quite much a democratic country, and I think our government in the future will reflect how South Koreans think among the future of the alliance. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Four really great presentations. The title of the event is Prospects and Challenges of the Alliance in 2021, and I think our government colleagues have sort of focused on the prospects, and our non-government colleagues have focused more on the challenges. So, you know, it sort of, we hear, seems like the marriage of 70 years is strong and steady, and others saying, well, if not headed for a divorce, at least it perhaps needs marriage counseling, because there are a number of very strong challenges. And also, as it often tends to be, is I think think tank people and academics, we're sort of like very demanding parents, is that we take for granted the things that our children have done well, and we focus more on the last few percentage points that they didn't get, and that's where the dialogue tends to be. So even if we do focus on the challenges, I think we first need to acknowledge the very strong relationship as reflected in the very strong public support numbers that Mr. Ko related, of both Americans and Koreans. Very strong support, perhaps historically high, for the alliance, the overall relationship, maintaining troops in Korea, and that's both from Koreans and Americans. So we'll sort of take that almost as a granted of all the good things, but focus, you know, I think inevitably on a lot of the challenges. And even beyond the internal alliance challenges that several of the panelists mentioned, then there's, of course, the growing North Korean threat, and then all of this is taking place amidst the growing US-China competition, and questions as to how to deal with a number of issues that are being directed at China, not only the COVID origination and the cover-up, but a lot of issues which Asian experts have been focusing on for quite some time: IPR violations, extraterritorial actions in the East and South China Seas. But those are coming more to the forefront as Americans and others are looking of sort of ways to push back on China. And to some, it's a belated realization of all the things that China has been doing that go against the norms of international behavior. So first of all, I encourage our audience members to type in questions, and I will pull from them. And initially, I'll focus a lot of the questions, mine and the audience, to Mr. Knapper and Mr. Ko, because they will leave early. But then if either of the other panelists want to respond, just sort of wave your hand, and I'll jump in. I think we sort of have to start with the special measures agreement issue and the potential linkage it has with US troop levels. And certainly it was very noticed, particularly by Koreans, that for the first time in 12 years, the Security Consultative Meeting statement did not include the usual US commitment to maintaining US troops at the current level of 28,500, which I remember Presidents Bush and Obama had highlighted that. So certainly a number of Koreans have raised the point that this should be interpreted as a threat from the US or a negotiating leverage, that until there is resolution of the SMA issue, that the US will not commit to maintain that same level of forces that we've had before. So if I could first call on Mr. Ko and Mr. Knapper to sort of identify that issue of why was that statement not included? I'm sure it wasn't an oversight. And sort of more broadly on, and also a question from one of the audience was, right now, are there SMA negotiations going on, or has that been put on hold really until after the US election, which is only a week away? So if I could ask the two government officials. Yeah, Mark.
Sure, I'll lead the charge here, DG Co, and then you can follow up. But no, I think certainly the fact that sentence was dropped from the joint communique did receive a lot of attention in the press. But I do think it probably got much more attention, or I think was read into more than it should have been. I mean, this was not a message directly sort of aimed at Korea, but rather was meant to reflect a broader and sort of worldwide assessment that's underway by the Pentagon of how we deploy our forces, and we're doing it as smartly as we can. And so, but by no means was it meant to be a threat or a way to sort of twist Korea's arm by its exclusion. As for the SMA discussions, as you know, we have a new negotiator, someone very well known in the State Department, Donna Welton, who has spent a lot of time in Korea, a lot of time in Japan, and she has been in contact with her Korean counterpart. But just given the circumstances, I mean, she hasn't been able to meet in person for some time. But for sure, discussions continue, and yeah, we remain frustrated that we don't have yet an agreement, but at the same time, hopeful that we can get something done.
Mr. Ko?
Yes, let me add a little bit more to the Mr. Knapper had mentioned. I think I'd like to reiterate the facts that while we have the SMA negotiations, so we never discussed the issue of the the reduction of the US forces from Korean Peninsula, and then as you know, there are a lot of the public statement by Secretary Pompeo and Secretary Esper that the United States commitment to defend the Korean Peninsula is very strong and unwavering commitment. Those kind of public statement has made many times. So that is a fact. We never discussed that issue, and then United States secretaries, repeatedly show their strong commitment to the defense of the Korean Peninsula. That is a fact. So why that clause is missing? I think that is a kind of reflection of the current situation that United States government is doing their kind of a policy of the global posture. I mean, those kind of things. I mean, and that we guess. I mean, this is a kind of the things. If there is a missing part, and so I'd like to reiterate that, I mean, there is no such discussions going on, went on between two governments about the reduction of the US-FK forces. So that is my focus and my reiteration. Thank you.
Okay. Anything from our other panelists? Okay, I'll move on. Another issue seemingly of difference between the US and South Korea is the return of wartime operational control transition. In 2014, it was shifted from a timeline-based or a date-based to a conditions-based. And there are three broad areas of conditions which have a lot of sub-conditions. President Moon or others in the administration seem to have identified wanting to conclude it by the end of his term in 2022, which would seem to be shifting it back to a timeline base as opposed to a conditions based. And there have been some remarks, including by Korean officials, of wanting to change the conditions in order to move this along. which some might see as trying to water down the conditions to reach a timeline-based rather than a condition-based. So one could see that the third condition being improving the security situation in the region, i.e. either denuclearizing or reducing the North Korean nuclear threat, is going in the wrong direction. They're continuing to build up. We just saw a new ICBM paraded at the October parade. So it would seem not only are none of the conditions have been met yet, but the third one is going in the wrong direction. So to have OPCON transition from the manner and the timeline that the US would like to see transition. So this time, if I could start with Director General Ko.
I think that is a very pointed questions. I mean, both countries, as you know, we agreed the condition-based outcome transfer. So all we are doing is we are try to meet all the conditions to advance the outcome transfer, the issue. I mean, there's no opinion difference between two countries. And then, there are many, issues like condition 1 and condition 2 and condition 3. And there are a lot of, the assignments that both the Korean side should meet. And the one is that also the military, the commanding structure as well. So there is some, initial operational capability test, and full operational capability test and full mission capability test. Those is kind of steps in this require some joint exercises. So I think the COVID-19 situation make us very much difficult to go forward with the as schedule. I mean, those kind of questions. I mean, we never try to change the condition-based outcome transfer to timeline basis outcome transfer. I mean, though there is some issues, I think that is things I think the manageable. I mean, this is more like technical issues, not the basically different the approach to the outcome transfer. That's I'd like to reiterate. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Knapper.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think really the key point is that we remain in full agreement that something as important as wartime operational control has to remain, very tightly lashed up with meeting these conditions that we've agreed to. Obviously, this is a very, it's a very serious issue and one that we don't take lightly, and we want to work with our Korean allies in a way that's respectful, but at the same time that we share the goal of ensuring that OPCON transition takes place in a manner that strengthens our alliance's capabilities and doesn't undermine it. So, we're in full agreement that these conditions have to be met before we can move to the next stage.
Okay, I'm going to pull in some questions from the audience. This one again is for Mr. Knapper and Director General Ko. South Korean First Vice Foreign Minister Chaesung said that Seoul and Washington are committed to launching a new working level dialogue by the middle of October, but it has not yet been launched. And are the two sides on the same page on this issue, or is there a particular reason that makes the two sides hard to launch the alliance dialogue? I'll start with Marc.
Yeah, since I didn't mute my microphone, so I'll just jump right in. So it's funny. So DG Ko and I, was it 2 weeks ago? We just sat down on the margins of the SCM. We sat down here in Washington to talk out further this idea of what's being temporarily or at least, I guess temporarily referred to as an alliance dialogue. Just trying to figure out sort of what this would look like. How would it fit among the many other dialogues we have, and to make sure that it serves the ultimate goal of improving communication and coordination between our two countries. And so this is something that Vice Minister Chae raised with Steve Biegun back in September, and we still continue to, we being the U.S., continue to look at it. We ask questions of our Korean friends, and to make sure that we fully understand it, and make sure that it, this is something that, again, makes sense within the web of all the other dialogues and conversations that we have.
Director General Trump?
Yes, since the idea is raised in September between the meetings of the Vice Foreign Ministers, Vice Foreign Minister Chae and the Steve Pigan. And then at that time, we believe we share the understanding of the necessity or the importance of having the working level consultations and meeting systemically the help, because we are meeting each other frequently. Whenever I going to the DC and whenever the Marc Knapper is coming to Seoul, we have a frequently meeting. But there is we wanted more like a systemic and regularized the meeting for the working level to continue our discussions with the solution basis. So that is our intention, and then just well received by the Deputy Secretary Bigan at the time. And then we agreed to continue to discuss to that issue. So I continued that discuss that issue with the Mr. Knapper 2 weeks ago, and then we the way forward to that idea. But I think we didn't decide yet the agreeable timing, and we need further clarification of the details. I mean, that is the thing that, but basically, I mean, the current situation of the COVID-19 is prevented us from, gathering many, delegations from each other. So those kind of current situation is making some, delaying the further movement of that idea. But I think I'm very confident that we are moving the right direction, and we are finally moving forward. Thank you.
So would this dialogue be in addition to the coordination committee, which was set up about a year or so ago, or would it be replacing that committee or meeting?
No, you mentioned the working group. That the working group, the dialogue mechanism is about the North Korean policy coordination. But our so-called tentatively called the alliance dialogue is basically the alliance management issue between the regional bureaus. So it's more like all the issues related issues, including the cooperation between Indo-Pacific and New Southern policy, and some the defense related alliance issues management as well. And there are many the issues, bilateral issues that systemic and regularized the setting of the platform.
Great. We're sort of going for a much broader topic, but I wanted to raise it before our government colleagues had to leave. As I said earlier, so all of this is taking place in the context of US-China. So we have some questions from the audiences for the Korean panelists. How is the Quad or Quad Plus viewed by South Korea in terms of its close relationships with both the US and China? If not as a full member, on what policy issues or geographic areas would Korea view benefiting engaging with members of the Quad? And then for our American panelists, how does the Quad or Quad Plus affect bilateral relations between the US and Korea? And how do you evaluate keeping the Quad as an informal group versus a more formal institution, which some have called the NATO of Asia? So again, I'll start with the government colleagues, but also now calling in our other panelists. I'll go Marc Knapper first.
That's the old classroom trick. I wasn't raising my hand. I was scratching my head, but you got me, Bruce. So I mean, the Quad at this point, as my boss Steve Began would say, I mean, it's very much it's a grouping that's based on, I think, our shared understanding of what our challenges are in the region. Us being, of course, the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. It's a grouping that began actually back in 2004, the December 26th Indian Ocean tsunami and our shared response among the four of us for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And this grouping's kind of waxed and waned over the years, but I think it's now waxing, and it's now, I think, growing out of a recognition that we do have shared challenges, we do have shared values and interests, but at the same time, while we're looking to kind of regularize our contacts and regularize what we do together, by no means are we meaning this to be exclusive or insular, meant to keep people out. But at the same time, as I think we've said publicly, we're just not quite at that stage yet where we're going to start accepting applications for membership. Not that it would be something. I mean, it would be a grouping I would suppose that countries could aspire to associate themselves with, but we're nowhere near the point where it's going to be institutionalized or changed into something that looks like a treaty organization.
Okay, Director General Ko?
Yes, let me clarify two things. We are very much closely watching over the development of CARD discussions. And the second, we are not asked by the United States to join and other countries to join for CARD. This is a kind of current status. And I also reiterate the principles of the cooperation with the other initiatives for the Asia-Pacific region cooperation. Our principle is that if there is transparency and openness and the inclusiveness, those kind of principle is maintained for the initiative of cooperation. We are very much open to engage in the cooperation. This is our policy. So that's why we are working closely together with the United States for the joint, the cooperation project for New Southern Policy and the Indo-Pacific strategy. So we are following those principles when we taking consideration of the new initiative from the other countries on the regional cooperation. This is our position.
Okay, any of the other panelists want to jump in? Evans, Revere?
Yeah, thank you. Building on the excellent points that Marc Knapper made about what the Quad is and more importantly, what it isn't, I certainly can't speak for our Korean colleagues here, but I do have the sense that to the extent that the Quad becomes a more formalized grouping, a more formalized organization, it's likely to heighten sensitivities in Seoul about participation in it. And so to the extent that the Quad can remain an informal grouping of like-minded countries that share a set of principles and seek to reinforce support for those principles in various ways, that probably increases the possibility that Seoul, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, which has some sensitivities about organizations like this, it increases the possibility that our Korean friends may be able to find a way, at a minimum, indirectly, if not more directly, to support some of the activities of the Quad. Thanks.
Right. Professor Chun?
Yes. Well, we know that there are many proposals in Quad consultation mechanism, but there is frequently some mentioning of Quad as a possible security, collective security system. For example, Secretary Asper once mentioned that there might be some NATO type of collective security system in Asia. That poses a serious challenge to South Korea, even though Quad right now is a very loose kind of consultative mechanism. But if there is a move toward a more rigid type of collective security system, that's a question of inclusion of exclusion problem. That's a dilemma for South Korea. I think that there might be very many ways of security cooperation with the United States and allies in Asia or strategic partners in Asia. That kind of collective consultative mechanism is one. and how to complement that with bilateral alliance is another. If we adopt that some kind of Cold War type of rhetoric in dealing with current situation, then it may cause unnecessary problems in dealing with the alliance. For example, NATO was created in 1949 when Cold War just started. We are not starting a Cold War or bipolar confrontation with China yet. So there is still a room for, developing cooperative mechanism with China. So South Korea, I think, is in line with US policy in maintaining the military status quo in Asia, but for South Korea, I think there are still several options to cooperate with the United States, and there might be some division of roles based on manufacturers. South Korea, South Korea's relations with China, or all the other policy concerns. So we need some kind of more creative type of security cooperative mechanism. Collective security or hub and spoke, those are all in the 20th century's type of security mechanism. We need to develop more diverse, multilateral, multi-level, that kind of.
Yeah, it seems like some of the differences or potential differences are on how formal the U.S. might want to make it. Sense I have is that the U.S. is seeking to make it formal and also sort of a strong, whatever you want to call it, anti-China coalition, or we can dispute the wording. Whereas South Korea seems to, as I remember years ago, someone told me their heart is in Washington, but their wallet is in Beijing, and not wanting to make a decision or a choice, a black-white choice between Washington and China. And I think that's also a prevalent view in Southeast Asia. So I noticed Presidential Advisor Moon Chung-in was quoted today in the Korean media as saying that South Korea's participation in a NATO-like multilateral military alliance in the Indo-Pacific may destabilize rather than promote security in the region, as China would treat Seoul as an enemy. The US's drive to form a regional coalition against China may prompt a counter-reaction from Beijing to form an alliance with Russia and North Korea. So certainly a range of views, but it may be on how strongly or how formally the US is pushing it. Perhaps getting another question, another easy topic. Japan-South Korea cooperation is considered to be of strategic importance to the US, including in the realm of security. What do you think are the prospects for significant improvement in relations? What will it take for Prime Minister Suga to agree to join the planned China, South Korea, Japan trilateral summit in Seoul? Is the US doing anything to actively promote easing of tensions?
Well, I will take a stab at that. And certainly can't speak on behalf of either Japanese or the Korean governments, but I can speak on behalf of the US government. And our view is that cooperation between Japan and Korea, that constructive, productive relations between these two allies of ours is critically important to our own security. So we say, we often say we don't take sides in the disputes, plural, between Japan and Korea, but actually we do take a side, and the side we take is our own. It's very important to us to ensure that our three countries are able to cooperate together to meet what we consider to be shared challenges in the region, whether it's the North Korean nuclear and missile threat, whether it's the challenges posed by the People's Republic of China to undermine our political systems and our shared values and the shared principles that we so enjoy, whether it's freedom of speech, freedom, to have our data protected and our privacy protected, and I can go on. But I think my point basically is that even though it may not be obvious publicly or in the press what the United States is doing to try and improve relations between and among our three countries, we are very much engaged and very much committed to try and find a way forward that addresses in a respectful way the issues of the past. Heaven knows in the United States we have history issues that we're still struggling with, but at the same time that can help pave the way to a better future, and a future in which we're able to have more constructive and cooperative ties.
Any of the other panelists?
Let me add a little bit more to Mark told. I think as you know, the Korean government is maintaining two-track approach to Japan. So while we are discussing the history issue, and we are keep going the future-oriented cooperation, this is our policy. And then we are very much engaged with all the ideas to solve the the history issue, currently the forced labor issue, but still there is the gap of the views on the direction or the solution of the issue. So we are very much engaged, continue to engage with Japan for the dialogue for that issue. And the other the future-oriented cooperation, we are very much ready to engage with Japan and further discussion. So we are waiting Japanese positive response for our readiness. That's the point that I'd like to raise. Thank you.
Okay. Another topic that seems that perhaps there's differences of view is a peace declaration, a peace agreement. There are many in a peace regime, permanent peace. And there have been a lot of senior level discussions between the US and South Korea where both governments have said there really is no change or no difference of view. But it seems that South Korea is looking for a peace statement, peace declaration as a way of trying to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table, whereas the US may see it as a more formal document that is part of a denuclearization agreement that would be later on. So if either or anyone wants to correct me or highlight or even just identify how do the two countries see this peace document, which is either just a simple one-page, the war is over with 2 or 4 signatures, or is it more formal that would require identifying or reducing the North Korean conventional threat to the South before an agreement is signed? Yeah. Well, like a teacher, if no one raises their hands, I'll call upon you. Director General Ko, could you explain the Korean position on the peace document? How formal would it be, and would it be coming early or later in a process with North Korea on denuclearization?
Yes, I'm I'm not actually in charge of the Korean Peninsula peace process issue. I'm dealing with the bilateral, the issues with the United States. But since you are asking me my opinions, I just try to deliver our government position on that. As you know, the peace declaration is a political declaration. We believe that is create the diplomatic space for all the related parties to join the discussion platform to address the denuclearization, as well as the the establishment of the Korean peace permanent peace regime. So I think that we see the utility of the end of war declaration. So that's why I think the many Korean media criticize that this is not related to the denuclearization, something like that, but all the things are related to each other. That is very much clear. I mean, they are not a separate idea which does not address the denuclearization and the establishment of peace, Korean peace regime. So we believe we see the utility of the end of war declaration as functioning for the facilitating the discussions for denuclearization, as well as the establishment of peace, Korean permanent peace regime. So that's his point.
Okay, Mark, do you want to jump in or?
Sure, and then I'm going to have to pull the eject cord for I think me and DG Co, since I think believe it or not, he and I are on the same phone call after this with our respective bosses, and so yeah, I would just say, I mean, Bruce, you mentioned earlier you asked about the working group between the U.S. and Korea, and for sure the working group is one of the venues at which we talk about things like peace declaration or end of war declaration, among many other aspects of our shared approach to North Korea. And so this is one of these areas, without getting into much detail about the contents, but it really, I think, reflects the close and really intense cooperation that goes on between Washington and Seoul.
Okay, thank you. And I understand Director General Ko and Mr. Knapper have to leave. Thank you very much for participating. We will continue on even after your departure. So again, thank you very much for participating. So now I'll bring in our other panelists more. I apologize for putting you on the sidelines for now, but we wanted to take advantage of our government colleagues while they were here. And Evans, I saw you had raised your hand on this issue.
Yeah. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
All right, something just weird happened with the screen there. Just some personal views on the issue of a peace declaration. Just to state the obvious, declaring peace does not make it so. And I think it's important to understand that. A unilateral declaration that declares the end of a war does very little to actually bring the war to an end. It requires concrete steps to do so, concrete steps that remove the basis for conflict and removes the problematic aspects of the threat that North Korea continues to pose to South Korea, the United States, and others in the region. That's point number one. Point number two, I find it interesting that there is all this discussion of a end of war declaration or a peace declaration, and yet for all that discussion, Pyongyang does not seem to be very interested in it. To me, that speaks volumes about what Pyongyang's real agenda is. And Pyongyang's real agenda is not to achieve a peace declaration. Pyongyang's agenda, they're after a much bigger fish. And the bigger fish is they're after not the end of the war, but the end of the capacity of the alliance to make war on them. Or put another way, end of the US presence and the end of the US-ROK alliance. And if you don't believe me, read Kim Jong-un's speeches, and he'll make it fairly clear. The third point to make is that a peace declaration, an end of war declaration, should be the product of a process that removes the bases or the causes or potential causes for conflict. And at the top of that list is North Korea's nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program. And in my view, with all due respect to our Korean colleagues, Seoul has got this issue backwards. They're pursuing a peace declaration in the hope that it will lead to denuclearization, when it seems to me that the game should be pursue denuclearization and achieve it in order to bring about peace on the Korean Peninsula. Just my personal view. Thank you.
Professor Chun, sort of either your view or your interpretation of what the Moon administration's view would be?
Sure, yeah. I basically agree with Evan's points. My president's suggestion, I think, is just to find a breakthrough in the post-Hanoi stalemate. There is no negotiations going on. If we just let things happen right now, then probably the next US administration will be so much absorbed in the domestic issues, such as dealing with COVID situation, economic recovery. Then there will be a great inattention to North Korean problem, which is a great punishment to North Koreans. And their option is to raise the level of tension and increase the level of nuclear missiles and weapon systems, which is not beneficial to South Korea and the United States. There will be a more direct threat to continental US. Then probably US will have less and less options. Probably you can have a better deterrence against North Korea. But if North Korea have a second strike capability, then there is no possibility that US will attack North Korea in any case, because there will be a second strike from North Korea to continental US using nuclear weapons. So there is a clear limit of time, and there is nothing much that we can do. And actually, in the late 2018, there was an argument about early harvest things. If North Korea does something, North Korea can give up their nuclear weapons step by step, but there is nothing, that kind of gradual things that we can give to North Koreans. You know, declaration is just a political announcement which do not have any legal effects. That's, I think, my government's view. So that's a relatively easy thing to give, but we cannot lift the economic sanctions partly or fully without any guarantee from North Korea that they will give up nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons can be given up gradually, but we cannot give a sanction lift gradually. That's the dilemma. So it's about sequencing problem actually. We can do a declaration of the end of war, which is just a small piece. It's a step to increase the trust level and try to have a new momentum to continue the negotiation. But as two presidents said, two governments said, the track of denuclearization should go in parallel with South Korea's any kind of policy giving declaration or anything else. So it's just a part of the whole deal, and it's just one suggestion to regain the momentum. But we have to deal with the whole package. There is a lot to think about.
I think on this issue, like several others, defining it is important. And I found sort of a lack of clarity as to what Seoul is pushing. There are times you can get wrapped around an axle on defining things, but it is important. I think in terms of a peace treaty, which would be perhaps a very lengthy, detailed document, you'd have to define that these are two countries signing an agreement. Does that require a change in both constitutions? Defining the boundary lines, and then, in my view, reviewing or reducing the conventional threat that North Korea poses to the South. So it would require quite detailed negotiations similar to the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, and then an expansion of confidence and security building measures, such as started to exist in the Comprehensive Military Agreement between the Koreas. So, I would see it as a very detailed negotiations that you sign the document at the end of those negotiations. But my sense is Seoul wants to sign a limited declaration that simply is a way of trying to prime the pump of getting North Korea back to the table. And when I've talked to South Korean officials, it tends to be trying to downplay the importance of the document as a way of inducing U.S. agreement to it. Sort of saying it's a political document, it has no impact on the real world, so why not sign it? Whereas I'd turn that around and say, if it has no impact, why are you doing it? And I also see potential dangers of it could lead to sort of this growing sense of, well, if the war is over, why do we have troops in South Korea? Why do we even have a United Nations command and all that? So it's a slippery slope where the perception could be driving force redeployments, even though the threat for which they are there to defend against has not changed. And also it could lead to a reduction in kind of international resolve on sanctions. On the US, how can you have Trading with the Enemy Act sanctions if you don't have an enemy? And sort of continuing the sense from Singapore of, if everything is solved, why do we still have sanctions? So I see more downsides than positives. And I think, like Evans was saying, I don't know how would North Korea act any differently? Or would they obey this piece of paper more than the armistice, which they've formally abrogated, I think, 4 or 5 times now? Evans, I'm going to give one to you since you're my sole remaining American on the panel. There's a question of the outcome of the U.S. presidential election next week is expected to impact the US-ROK relations in the future. What would the alliance look like if Donald Trump is reelected versus Joe Biden becoming the president? So bit of a tough, contentious
Agreed.
question there.
I'm not going to get into the prognostication game in terms of the outcome of the election, but I will go back to some of the comments I made in my opening remarks at today's webinar, in which I referred to the things that President Trump has said on the record over the years about the alliance, about individual allies, particularly the Republic of Korea, in which he has been cited by former cabinet members as having said in various meetings that he wonders why we have an alliance with the ROK, et cetera, et cetera. These are troubling comments, quite frankly. And I have to take him at his word that he is not necessarily a believer in alliances, unlike every one of his presidential predecessors. He seems to have a particular passion for criticizing the ROK as well as NATO. And this is troubling. I would hope that the strength of support that the US-ROK alliance has in the United States, and that support is very strong among our military, among former officials, former military, among policy elites, think tanks, et cetera, et cetera. I would hope that the strength of that would be able to push back against any potential move on the part of the president to operationalize a number of the prejudices and a number of the views that he has expressed over the years about the alliance. I am comforted by the recent polling that has been done by Pew and by the Chicago Council, showing the strength of support that the alliance has among the American people and the strength of the commitment that Americans have to following through on America's commitments to the Republic of Korea. And so I think all of those factors will be necessary, I think, to ensure that we keep this alliance on the proper track, on the proper path, if the president is reelected. And I would hope that wise heads would prevail in the president's cabinet if he were to try to suggest that the United States go down that path. And that's why, like you, I was concerned at the absence of certain language in the SCM communique guaranteeing a certain baseline commitment of US forces in Korea, because the absence of that language suggested to me that not only the level of US forces, but perhaps even US forces themselves were on the table in the future. I was encouraged to hear from both Director General Ko and Deputy Assistant Secretary Knapper that that's not the case. But once again, I keep going back through the record of Donald Trump's comments, both as president, as candidate, and in his previous life, in which he has made some very strong and powerful suggestions that he does not have the same commitment to this alliance that every single one of his predecessors did.
Well, and just to add that beyond the strong public support in the United States, there's very strong bipartisan congressional support to the degree that there was not only the support, but also the concern, and that in last year's Defense Department budget, there was language that was put in that said the President or the Secretary of Defense could not go below 20,000 troops. And then this year's National Defense, the Pentagon budget put the floor at the existing 28,500 troops, unless the Secretary of Defense could certify that he had notified our Korean allies 90 days in advance, and that this would not hurt the U.S. national security. Now, others have pointed out that since under the Constitution, the U.S. President is the Commander-in-Chief and can move U.S. forces under his authority, and that the Secretary of Defense could simply say, no, this is not hurting our defense. Our Korean allies have improved their capabilities and therefore withdraw them. So I see it more as a sense of Congress, but a very strong message from Congress in support of the alliance. rather than something that would really prevent any president from exercising his commander-in-chief authorities under the Constitution. But I think there is concern amongst Korea watchers in Washington and elsewhere that particularly given the seemingly very abrupt withdrawal or announcement of 9,500 troops from Germany, which the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense, and others gave briefings identifying that it was for strategic reasons, and then shortly after their presentations, President Trump tweeted that it was because of money and a lack of contributions from Germany towards the NATO goal of 2% of GDP. We're getting close on the end of time, but I want to go a little bit more on North Korea and policy, where it does seem that there are differences of view between the U.S. and South Korea on the approach to North Korea. I think because North Korea has been relatively quiet, has not done a nuclear or ICBM test, and after the lack of a resolution in Hanoi, I think North Korea has largely been put on the back burner here in the United States. The missile violations last year were largely ignored. The parade was of great interest to all of us who watch it, Korea, but not really picked up much by the administration or by the media beyond the immediate event. Whereas I think in South Korea, there's much greater focus by the Moon administration of trying to get some kind of movement, given the tensions that there were earlier this year with the blowing up of the Inter-Korean Liaison Office in Chaesung and the threats, which then North Korea backed away from. So kind of throwing it open to both of you, how do you see this, perhaps on the one way, ignoring North Korea on the U.S. side until they act up, although President Trump said he would have an agreement shortly after re-election if he's re-elected, from a much more eager point of view from Korea trying to get, if not Seoul and Pyongyang back in the same room, at least getting Washington and Pyongyang back in the same room. So we'll throw that open as our last discussion point, and then we'll bring it to a close. And I'm looking for a show of hands. Evan,
want me to go first?
Okay, yeah. Go ahead, Evans.
We have in place, and you alluded to this, in effect, a gentleman's agreement, if you will, between the US president and the North Korean leader, that as long as North Korea is not engaging in nuclear weapons testing and not carrying out long-range ballistic missile tests, everything short of that seems to be fair game. The intermediate range and shorter range and long-range artillery systems that were all tested by North Korea, the United States basically looked the other way, as did, by the way, the Republic of Korea. It remains to be seen post-election, if President Trump is reelected, what North Korea will do. My suspicion is that North Korea, the other party to this gentleman's agreement, will begin to probe and prod the reelected Trump administration to say, now is the time for you to invest in the future of our relationship by taking or proposing concrete steps that you can take that will ensure that we adhere to the moratorium on testing of those two systems, even though they've declared the moratorium dead. A very different scenario, I think, will obtain if Joe Biden is elected, and that is the North Koreans are very likely to do to a President-elect Biden what they did to the newly inaugurated President Obama, which would, you will recall, during the transition, North Korea began to make some very martial statements about their intentions, and shortly after President Obama was inaugurated, they began to carry out those statements in the form of missile tests and nuclear weapons tests. They will want to test the incoming president for certain. And the nature of what that test or provocation will be remains to be seen. But the North Koreans have ways of testing an incoming US president, and I feel fairly certain that they are likely to take advantage of an opportunity to do so.
I remember a North Korean defector once told me that they do a strong action in the first year of a new US and South Korean administration in order to train them like a dog, in that they feel it gives them leverage, it induces concessions or returning to negotiating table. I think it often is counterproductive in that when President Obama came into office, he had pretty much blamed President Bush for the stalemate and lack of progress with North Korea, and yet had not finished his policy review when North Korea did an ICBM and a nuke test. And the Obama administration ended up adopting a stronger policy than they had originally planned on doing. And we saw that actions on the eve of President Park Geun-hye's election, and then the first year of President Trump, there was the ICBMs and the hydrogen bomb, et cetera. So I think it's pretty consistent, and they also did it, I think, under George Bush, et cetera. So, and even under a re-elected president, we had the Leap Day Agreement and then the satellite launch, et cetera, which torpedoed it. So over to you, Professor Chun, for any last remarks.
Yes, I think President Park knows better, but let me make a short statement. You know, there could be two types of interpretation of North Korea's intention. You know, if we interpret North Korea's intention offensively, then North Korea intends to develop nuclear weapons to a certain level and try to have an upper hand on South Korea and want to be recognized as official nuclear weapon state, which will give them more options for the future. If we interpret North Korea's intention defensively, then Kim Jong-un and North Korean leadership and the system itself is very fragile, can be threatened very easily by their own people or outside powers. When they talk about security guarantee, they mean many things. You know, Kim Jong-un wants to be guaranteed of his own survival as a person, or political dictatorship, or a political system that can be shielded against any possible influence from South Korea in the short term. If we look back upon the year 2018, Kim Jong-un may expected that President Trump is understanding Kim Jong-un's position. So he might continue negotiations with the United States. But if we read Kim Yo-jong's statement in July this year, she said that we have to deal with the whole United States, not just President Trump. So there is a lot of offensive voices from the United States, which probably hope that North Korea will disappear from the map. That kind of also false interpretation, but that's a dilemma situation between the US and North Korea. And that situation, repeats itself. There will be a new president in the United States next year. There will be a new South Korean president in 2022. So the administration changes, and the small understanding that was accumulated in the former administration then goes away. So North Korea do not have a coherent strategy or understanding of South Korea-US policy. They just want to accumulate their military power, which is a big problem. So what we need is some kind of coherent strategy across the administrations and between South Korea and the United States. That the basic principle is this, actually the end state is very clear. We want to guarantee North Korea's survival, but you have to denuclearize itself. You have to be a normal state that conform to international norms. And China's influence should not be too much, predominant, because South Koreans have a inter-Korean relations which is peaceful. How to achieve that is a problem. Then there should be a trust and some trial. We have to shape North Korea's intention, which is not easy. But the first thing is that we have to understand this dilemma situation. There is a mutual aggravation of understanding between North Korea and outside powers.
Great, thanks very much. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think we covered a lot of territory. I think a sign of a good event is you run out of time before you run out of questions. So we could go on for a long time, but it's probably time for our Korean friends to get a cup of coffee and American friends to go get a glass of scotch or bourbon. So I want to thank Seoul for the opportunity to be involved in this and have Heritage involved, as well as the opportunity to moderate it. So I'll turn it back to my friend now, Dr. Peck. Thank you again, sir.
You're muted.
Dr. Peck, you are muted now.
Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you, Bruce. For North Korea, I'm afraid we need hours and hours of conversation. Today, I think we had a very candid exchange of views, sometimes in agreement and other times in disagreement. But as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the next US administration and the South Korean government will have to review and fix whatever problems we have and strengthen the alliance with each other. That's something we are expecting, we are looking forward to. And thank you, Bruce, again, Heritage Foundation, and all the panelists. The government officials are gone now. Thank you, Evans, and thank you, Chaesung. And thank you all very much. Let's continue our conversation and cooperation with the Heritage Foundation far into the future. Thank you. Thank you all.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jung as well, for your hard work. Thank you, Jung.
Thank you, everyone.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. 감사합니다.